是的，配合12月是人权月，也配合这个第3届的公民社会奖呢。今天我们主办单位也将呈现给大家一个专题演讲。那么今天的演讲者呢，相信不必太多介绍，他呢就是我们的云大顺的律师，他也是一位著名的人权律师，也是我的宪法请决运动的推动者。Now, next, the organizing committee would like to present to you a keynote speech by someone who requires no further introduction. He is currently a lawyer, the founder of My Consti campaign, and he is the community mover Malaysian Center for Constitutionalism and Human Rights. And he will present to us a keynote speech entitled Our Constitution and the Challenges we face in Malaysia. Round of applause to Mr. Edmund.
The speech was given by our first speaker, and he said this about the Constitution. He said, "It is the product of many minds working with a common aim to evolve a basic charter for this new Malayan nation of ours. A charter drawn from our past experience and suited to the conditions of our surroundings and way of life. A charter of our firm faith in the concepts and traditions of parliamentary democracy. And finally, and most important of all, a charter of our common belief that certain fundamental liberties are essential to the dignity and self-respect of man. These fundamental liberties are written into our Constitution. They include the liberty and equality of persons under the law, the basic freedom of speech and freedom of worship. The Constitution proclaims Islam as the official religion of the Federation and makes Malay the official language. The Constitution assures the right to all our subjects to worship in their own religions and to preserve their own languages and culture. It also confers citizenship on a wide category of persons who are prepared to make the Federation their home and the object of their loyalty. This Constitution, unique in many ways, is a comprehensive declaration of duties and responsibilities, authority and prerogatives, affecting all organs of the state and all citizens of the land. In more symbolic terms, it is a compass which will guide us through the unknown future." And then he goes on and says, in this way, he defines the Constitution, he says, in this way, it ensures that the voice of the people is the will of the people. In particular, this Constitution is the guardian of the rule of law. It protects the integrity, the freedom from influence, and the independence of our courts, and our judges, and our law officers, and the members of our various commissions of the public service, responsible for appointments and discipline. In this way, it ensures the security, integrity, and impartiality of the civil service. The Constitution belongs to all of us. It belongs to us as the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. It belongs to you as the members of Parliament. It belongs to the people as the fount of power. It is our earnest hope that as many as possible of our subjects will take early opportunity to make themselves familiar with our Constitution and with the powers and procedure of our Parliament. This was a speech when he opened Parliament in 1959, and I thought it was apt to just read it again because many of us forget some of the challenges that we have been facing and the founding reason when the Constitution was formed, and how when he spoke about it in 1959, much has changed. Human rights is very much inherent in our Constitution. It's called constitutional liberties in Part 2, but in generic terms we call it human rights. In simple terms we call it human rights. And human rights are inherent in everyone, indivisible in essence, and interdependent in its instrumentality. The right to adequate food cannot be separated from the right to housing, education, speech, assembly, association, and freedom from torture. Human rights sets out minimum benchmarks which every state must give. They must respect, must protect, the state must respect, must protect, and fulfill to all of its citizens the constitutional rights given to all of its citizens. So in our constitution, we have many rights. We have the right to life, we have the right to freedom from slavery, we have the right to equality, we have the right to speech and expression, we have the right to freedom of assembly, we have the right to freedom of movement, we have the right to practice and profess our religion, we have the right to property. All these rights have been inserted into the Constitution because human rights is founded on the principles of equality, freedom and dignity, and the formation of a more holistic person. Therefore, when we speak about the challenges we face in respect of human rights today in Malaysia, we see that in two main areas we have real problems. First, the content of our rights, and secondly, the instrumentality of our rights. The continued contestation of human rights all over the world has and is still continuing about the precise nature, limits of human rights in our daily lives. Issues and questions of public security, religion, national interest, and the like continue to play out when we speak about human rights. The challenge is compounded in a country like Malaysia, where basic human rights and constitutional law education is not at all taught in our primary and secondary schools, save for a study in Form 6. And that, I think, is elective as well. Where education of our rights, our constitutional liberties is poor, is imperfect, many quarters, and particularly the state, face much less resistance from the people when the rights of citizens are trampled upon or are taken away. The reason is simple. It's because people do not even know that these rights exist in the first place, and we are able to assert these rights forcefully against state abuses. More mischievously, certain quarters would choose to distort the rights message, would demonize the rights messengers, and at times by force deny the freedom of the brave and courageous who will assert those rights. In particular, there are some who disguise the inability to articulate opposition to rights demands by saying it is political. There is a political agenda. You are an agent of the America. You are an agent of the Jews. These type of arguments distort the rights message, of course. But of course, the answer cannot be that we run away from it. The answer must be that, of course, human rights, of course, civil liberties, constitutional liberties is political. It's nothing but political, because we are attempting, in no uncertain terms, to speaking rights to power in trying to address the imbalance of power for the people. It is also because politics, the influence of politics, and the good and bad of politics and political affairs that we see every day in Parliament, every day in Putrajaya, affects our daily lives. Never forget that. And so when people say that constitutional rights and liberties and the struggle for human rights is political, the answer must be yes. But if they say that because of that, we will not want to partake in this struggle, it means that we have failed our nation. We have failed our constitution. And we have failed to understand the precise significance and impact of our constitutional rights set out in our constitution in Part 2. This goes back again to my first point about the main challenge of education and about miseducation of rights. While we grapple with the idea of human rights, the second main challenge is the implementation of existing rights protected by our constitution. Human rights, as I mentioned, are instruments for human civilization and progress. If, for example, scientists, philosophers, writers were at one point in time not able to think, act, speak, we would not have cars, telephones, aeroplanes, or even Facebook today. Because rights are interdependent, rights such as freedom of assembly and freedom of expression are instruments in themselves and are instrumental towards augmenting or strengthening other rights, like the right to food, water, housing, and education. Someone who is hungry would not be able to inform us he is hungry unless he can speak. Someone who is suffering cannot alleviate his or suffering unless we are told about it and we get information. In this perspective, certain quarters, including state-sponsored or state-outsourced agents, attempt at the very least to make a frontal attack on these rights instruments. These rights which are instruments like speech and assembly, as well as association. Because they do not like to hear, they do not like to see, they do not like to feel what we the citizens want them to hear, see and feel, i.e. the plight and human suffering of the people of Malaysia who are suffering in different ways. So when our instruments to channel our grievances, such as speech and assembly and association, which are themselves protected by a constitution, taken away, the rakyat will be silenced. It therefore comes as no surprise that while general elections loom soon, the government introduces the controversial Peaceful Assembly Bill and rushes its passing without proper consultation and despite widespread opposition to the bill. Reminding us that in 2008, Barisan Nasional suffered unprecedented losses at both federal and state levels following mass protests, starting with the Lawyers' Walk for Justice in September 2007, followed by Hindraf, Bersih, GMI, and other different rallies. It now comes again, as I said, no surprise, that as election looms, there is this bill which bans street protests. The answer to protecting our rights may be in the vote, may be in the ballot, some say. We should not be overly concerned if our process of elections is free and fair, with the Election Commission playing its proper constitutional role under Articles 113 and 114 of the Federal Constitution. But we have seen much, too much, read much, too much, to be able to comfortably say that the cornerstone of our democratic process is now the most, to comfortably say that the cornerstone of a democratic process is now not the most credible. To this extent, the Parliamentary Select Committee on Elections to improve our elections process has been formed as is underway in its work. We must support all attempts at reform, bearing in mind that Article 119 is a constitutional guarantee to all eligible voters to choose a government of our choice.